Greetings and salutations to our fine podcast audience. Ed, Nathan, welcome back.
Hello.
Hello, Jason.
Thank you for having us back.
It's my pleasure.
I was glad my schedule opened up so we could all be here.
Jason is the host of the
Jason's the host. We're just the
church
guests.
foyer.
Yes.
Anytime you come to the church, you'll find Jason. We go, hey, welcome to the church foyer.
Jason has
here
just
waiting
yet
for
to
you.
find anybody else who will sit with him here and talk about these things. As soon as he can get better quality guests, he will get them.
When you hear him say that, welcome our fine podcast office. Jason, Ed, Nathan.
And nobody's here.
Nobody else wanted to come.
Nobody else. But you're here.
We're here. We're glad.
We're glad to be here with
Yes, we
Thank
are.
you for asking us, Jason.
You're very welcome.
you. Jason, you got some headlines for us. I see you got some stuff written down.
I have
I
headlines.
still, as the old person, I can't get in my mind we're doing this.
Don't you love? That's your favorite segment, Ed.
It is.
Don't you just love it?
I always forget it because I had such a good time the last time.
All right.
True.
So we have some headlines, and here they are. Man allegedly hid from coronavirus and from the authorities in a Chicago airport for 3 months.
Those two things don't sound like they're linked.
Yeah, I don't know how you do both.
If
Hide
they are
from the coronavirus.
Well,
I know.
I guess if you
but
saw,
it's only allegedly he did it.
Well, it's news. You have to say allegedly until he's convicted.
Oh, okay.
so I'm assuming that the hiding from the coronavirus was that he was in an airport where nobody was, and is that he just never had contact with anybody, so he was able to.
Well,
get
I'm going
coronavirus?
to start saying things like, Joel allegedly wants to be here for the podcast.
No, that's pretty certain. He didn't want to be here. No, a California man was arrested Saturday accused of hiding in a restricted area of Chicago's O'Hare Airport for 3 months. Man told police that COVID-19 had rendered him too scared to travel home to California, so he hid in the airport, surviving on food provided by strangers. So the guy was on his way home. He got scared and hid out and would not fly home.
The hiding from the coronavirus was he was scared of the coronavirus, so
Yes.
he was hiding from it.
Yeah.
And we all know airports are the one place the
guess.
coronavirus cannot come.
I guess.
Yeah.
Or
Not a
he
lot of
thought it was
people.
in California and didn't want to go
guess
there.
so.
All right. Well, good on you, I guess. So what was he going to get arrested for?
Well, it says he faces felony charges of criminal trespass in a restricted area of the airport, as well as misdemeanor theft charges. So I'm guessing he probably stole some stuff while he was there.
There
He had
you
to
go.
eat or something. He
Maybe
stole
that's
food.
what he was hiding from. Going to jail.
Well, if you can survive for 3 months in an airport, I'm just
I
saying.
don't know. What's
now
the
I'm
end of
having
that
some
sentence
ide-
there,
I'm just
Jason?
thinking-
You're going to go live in the airport?
I'm just having some ideas of
Oh.
maybe, you want to save a little bit of cash.
There's that Tom Hanks movie.
I was going to
Yeah.
say, there's a Tom Hanks
Is there?
movie, isn't
that
there?
I think everybody thought was based on a true story, but it is not based
It
on a
is
true
now.
story. Well, it was like loosely based on a true story, but like the country that he's from in the movie is not a real country.
Namibia.
So, I don't remember the name of the country, but because he's doing some accent that isn't an accent, so it's like roughly Eastern European.
It says also here, I just saw this. The guy had somehow gotten himself a fake ID badge, and he was using it to stay in these restricted areas.
There's a lot more you explain about this story, the less it sounds
Yeah.
like he was afraid of the coronavirus.
Well, I'm thinking he really didn't. If you could stay somewhere 3 months and your family or somebody didn't contact you, I don't think he had a home to go to.
Maybe not.
Or at least nobody to go to.
Nobody to go to,
That's
nor
sad.
no job or anything.
That's
Yeah, these
just
are supposed
sad.
to be funny, Jason.
You
not
know, I don't
sad.
know what you guys are noticing, but while we're doing this, Joel is gathering garbage cans. we don't know.
It's to be his desk.
Oh, okay.
To be his desk for his
I see
laptop.
Ah, I got it now. I noticed Joel,
I thought the same
I
thing.
thought, why is Joel gathering garbage cans?
He's preparing to go live in an airport.
You
for
got to
3
go
months.
get his trash for his
If I would have
airport.
lived in an airport,
is how he would do it.
in this foyer for 3 months.
Wow.
Money's ready.
Okay. So there's that. I now have a new idea. Living in an
Oh,
airport.
live in an airport.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
All right. Here's our second one, and this is going to be it for today. And I don't know. This one might be a little touchy.
All right.
All right.
Atlantic City is offering bidders the chance to blow up a former Trump casino.
Oh, wow. It seems very aggressive.
It does.
They're going to blow it up, like demolish it?
Yeah, it says
It went bankrupt.
It's
like
been
several other things.
apparently vacant for about 6 years. It's the Trump Plaza Hotel and
Yeah.
Casino on the boardwalk in Atlantic City,
Yep.
and they're wanting to get rid of it. And so they're obviously trying to make
The
some
Trump
money.
casino is offering for people to blow it up.
Oh, let's
No,
see.
I think whoever owns
It's the
it
city
now.
officials.
Oh, it went bankrupt.
Yes.
The building itself has been
Yes.
foreclosed upon.
Yeah.
Yes, the city is trying to do it, and here's the good: they're going to take the proceeds of whatever they get from the bidders. They're going to auction, or the auction is going to benefit the Boys and Girls Clubs of Atlantic
That's
City.
good news.
Yeah.
That's
So
that's at least
basically,
good news.
but here's the weird thing to me when I was reading the story. The only thing you're bidding for is the ability to press the button. And they say here that you can do it remotely from wherever you are. So
Hey.
you could sit at your computer and hit
then
a button.
that means
How do
that
you
button
know that it
don't do
matters?
nothing.
That's
Because
right.
what that means is you hit a button from your laptop in Noonan, Georgia, and then some dude goes, "Oh, he pushed the button," and then he pushes the
Press the
button for
button.
what it is.
For all we know, that's what Joel's doing on the garbage can over there.
Joel is bidding currently right now
That's right.
on eBay.com for the Trump casino.
Or he's the guy they hired. That's a part of his part-time work.
Gotcha.
He is the guy to push the button
Yes.
when he gets the notification.
There you go. Well, that would be fun to get to blow up a building, I guess. But
I was going to say,
Pushing-
I would like
pushing-
to blow something up.
yeah, but to push the button doesn't sound that
Yeah,
fun.
That doesn't seem that fun. It
Yeah,
seems
someone
too-
else did all the cool work of figuring out how to blow it up safely. And
I don't know that that's cool work.
Oh, I think
know.
it's cool.
Getting to figure out how to blow something up without hurting anybody, because they got to figure all that. They got to set the
Yeah.
charges. They got to
Yep.
figure out how to make, I guess where you put them structurally to make sure that it.
Yeah.
I guess they call them implosions,
Implode.
right?
Yeah, they're going to implode it.
Because I have exploded some things and put a lot of people in danger.
Yeah.
And it was not a good idea.
I've started a
fun to
grill
watch.
or two in my time that's had enough explosion to lift the lid.
I put some aerosol.
I've singed some hairs on my face.
Yeah.
I put a couple aerosol cans and some stuff, and we thought we were being safe because we didn't want the explosion to be too bad. This was when I was in high school, and so we took an aerosol can, we set a bonfire, and we put a bunch of heavy stuff on top of the aerosol can because we thought, well, if it's got a bunch of rocks and pieces of metal on top, that'll keep the explosion from being bad. Not understanding what shrapnel was when we were children, and so having lots of glass and didn't realize we
Wow.
had made a dirty bomb of sorts.
It's
So-
amazing you're alive.
yeah, well, that's more true for lots of different things.
Yeah.
One of my kids the other day, I heard some banging on the house, and I went outside, and they had a giant rock, and they were hitting the gas line, just banging on the gas line. And I said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "I don't know." And I said, "You're just hitting the gas." I said,
Apparently.
I said, "I know I often say this is very dangerous, and you don't believe me. This thing was actually pretty
It
dangerous.
is really dangerous.
You blow up our whole house."
Wow.
And I said, on Christmas morning, we had to call the gas company because we smelled a gas leak. And now I'm thinking it was just one of my kids banging on the gas line. So luckily, I did not smell nor hear anything. But you never know. So if my house explodes, it was one of my
we know
children's
who to
fault.
come
Yeah.
see. All right. So today we do have several questions. Thanks to our listeners. We've been getting lots of questions. So
We get
thank
questions.
you guys for sending lots of questions in. We're going to do our best at
It
them.
probably means we're very confusing.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe.
More, our answers lead to more
More
questions.
questions.
So you guys just stop and you might figure all this out. So anyway, all right, here's the first question. And it's a great one. Stuff I've thought about before, and we'll see if there's a decent
Jason
answer
sent this question.
to it. No, I didn't. But I've thought
Do you love Jason?
We do.
Check yes or
we
no.
do.
Given that God is such a loving father of all creation, why would he choose death as an atonement for sin in the first place? Back in the Garden of Eden, why make an innocent animal die, knowing that this would lead to the torturous death of his own son? So, boiling it down, why is death the thing that leads to the forgiveness of sin?
Good question.
And the reason you're hearing silence is because that's the answer.
There's
a mystery to it. And
Yeah.
I just talked about this a few weeks back when I was setting up communion in our online service, and I talked about that there is a mystery to the cross, and that's part of what we do when we remember Jesus' death. Is we ponder that a little bit, and we're kind of in awe for a moment of wondering what is it that happened there. All I can see is that there's an act of love being done on my behalf, and I don't exactly necessarily know how it works. I mean, there are images that the Bible gives us, don't get me wrong, about how that might work out, but in the end, there is mystery to that whole thing.
Yeah.
Well, and even the images, and Jesus himself talks about his death. They're all either analogies or some kind of metaphor. He doesn't sit down and write out a manual of, and when I die, here are the processes that will take place in order. Because that's not even, and I don't even think that's really the right way to think about any of that stuff, because by and large, everything Jesus is doing is in the context of relationship and story. He's talking about things that have come before and things that are happening now. And so when we try to think of, well, what was the exact process? I do think sometimes we get ourselves, and I'll just say this, Christians get themselves into, at times, a legalism about things, which is, well, if Jesus' death accomplished X, Y, and Z, these are the ways that it did it, then here's kind of the loopholes that I can still have the death apply to me, but not really do anything Jesus asked me to do, because the death was covering this thing or doing this thing. And I think we get ourselves in a bad position on that. That's not to say this is a bad question. It's to say that when we get too deep into the idea of this, the way it often gets referred to is like theories of atonement, of what happened on the cross. Atonement just means, the easiest way to do it is it means at one-ment, right? Is that it's what brought us back together, the way Paul would say it is reconciled us to Christ. We know something happened on the cross. Jesus' death on the cross did something that took us, which was broken and separated from God, and brought us back into relationship with God and one another. That part is clear from the Bible. That through Christ, God has reconciled all things. But as you've said, there's kind of a mystery around, what happened? And how?
And the bigger part of this question, I think, is not what, but why.
Right.
And
why death?
I think when Jason was first telling me about this question, my thought was, I told him, I said, my answer is normally, I don't have an answer to why God does things unless God decides to tell me why he does things. Honestly, that's true about everybody.
Yes.
I don't know why you did what you did unless you tell me why you did what you did. I can often try to infer it, and often I am wrong on why you did it, but I don't know why.
Well, and as I was going to say, even the images that Nathan, you alluded to, that we get in the scriptures, there's that legal image that is given of justice being done, and then, all of the punishment of sin coming down on Jesus, which is a correct way to view that. Like you said earlier, there's always a what if or a loophole or again, back to your question, Ed, well, why does it have to be that way, God? Couldn't you have made it any other way? And then we try to box God into this thing of saying, well, there was no other way to do it, and we somehow forced God's hand, which makes him not God.
Right.
So even those images run out of steam at some point when you run them all the way forward.
Well, and when you get right down to it, and again, I don't want to make too much about the language itself. When Paul says Jesus was crucified from the creation of the world, so technically then God knew Jesus was going to be crucified before there had been sin.
Yes.
Again, I don't understand all that.
I don't either.
I don't understand all that, but that's what Paul says, from the foundation of the world. Now, he could be talking about this event that took place at the foundation of the world. Maybe that's what he's talking about. But I want to have a good why on all of that. And even this thing of justice and atonement, that's, I'm atoning for something. It's a justice thing. There's another analogy used of ransom. We're being held captive.
Right. Yep.
And he's a ransom. So that's another way to look at it, which there's no justice in a ransom.
That's right.
Right.
Somebody has taken something that doesn't belong, is holding them for something. So,
well, and God's the one that's he's not ransoming us from himself.
He's not holding us captive.
Yeah.
So Jesus' death is ransom. He's paying a ransom for us. So there are these images of what is taking place when Jesus, and again, by the question, and it may have been me that did this, and you heard me teach it this way. That thing of an animal had to die and why God killed the innocent animal. I've actually taught that creation part of
Me too.
that way. I'm not sure I would teach it that way these days as
Yeah.
my understanding of Scripture. And
Mm-hmm.
that question is building on a systematic theology that's not necessarily in the text.
Right.
You know,
Well,
it might be implied. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm not
No.
saying that. I'm saying the text itself does not say God killed the animal as a covering for their sin. It said for a covering for their body.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is I think even when we talk about, so you use language like Jesus uses a legal or not Jesus, and Paul uses a legal
Yes.
metaphor at one point. Jesus uses ransom
Right.
language. And
Paul also uses the victory model
Yeah,
of,
he
Yes.
of defeating the powers of sin,
That's
death, and
exactly
Satan.
right.
But all of those images are human images. They come from, the legal system that he's talking about is a human system. Ransom is obviously a human. They're trying to take something that happened in heavenly spiritual realities and say, here's a way you can understand it in this. Because another way that Paul used it when we talk about this, I'm reading a book on this right now, which I think is interesting, is the language of grace and faith is language that comes from what is called a patronage line, which is someone who does a gift for someone else. The best way that this person explained it, which makes total sense, is if you've ever seen the beginning of The Godfather, that when they come and they say, hey, I need you to do a favor for me, and he goes, one day I'm going to call on a favor from you. That was the way old families, and not biological, this was all different kinds of people that worked for you, people who were just close to you. The person who had resources or had power, had influence, would do a favor as a gift to someone, and that was referred to as charis, or what we call grace.
Right.
And it was a gift, but it was understood that when I give this gift, you'll be aligned with me. You'll be in allegiance to me. And Paul says that that's what's happening on the cross, that God is giving us a free gift that we can't earn, which is grace. We give, and the Greek word would have been pistis, which is faith. In response. And that's me saying, I now will trust you, but by trust doesn't mean just accept what you mean. It means I'm now on your team.
I'm
Whatever
aligned
you
with
need
you.
me to do, I'm going to do it for you because you did this for me. All of that is using cultural language to explain the kind of relationship that now exists between us and God because of what Jesus did. It isn't this step by step, if you want to do for yourself what God is, or, like, here's how you can repeat what Jesus did. That wasn't even on their mind, because the idea was you don't really need to know how it happened. You just need to trust that it did happen and that you have to now live differently because of it. And so when you talk about even the language of killing of an animal, we know that wasn't just a Jewish thing that happened. Yeah. That was something that all cultures did.
Yeah.
Sacrifice was a normal part of that because, and I think this we do know when you talk about why death, we don't know the why, but we do know, and I think Jason's preaching a message on this in a couple weeks from when we're filming this. I don't know when in relation.
Might be the very week of this.
Yeah, maybe the week. But Jason used the language of there's Paul, when he's talking about it, says the wages of sin is death, that there's a cost that is applied to death, to sin. But I think every culture knows it's inherent to us, which is why there's always this feeling of some kind of sacrifice we have to do. Even non-Judeo-Christian societies understand this idea of like penance, of this idea that I have to, I've done, even karma is a part of that. It's this idea of I've done a bad thing, so something bad eventually is going to happen to me. It's this understanding there's a cost applied to the bad things I've done. And God is working within that framework and helping us understand his relationship by saying there is a cost applied to the wrong things you do. And in this case, it's death.
And I've recently been reading two of my favorite scholars right now, Greg Boyd and N.T. Wright, and they both talk about this kind of thing of everything we see, especially in the Old Testament, that God is doing within the nation of Israel, particularly this animal sacrifice thing, which, like you said, was going on already. It wasn't something God invented. No. It was happening within the cultures. He's taking that and accommodating to the culture, or condescending, as we use that word, coming down into the culture and saying, okay, let me take what this practice you already have here, and I'm going to reframe that and help you see more of who I am.
Right.
By using it where they are in the moment of history that they're in, and not, because you can't take them all the way there. it's an accommodation every single time. So the same thing with this whole idea of death and sacrifice. It's not that God said, well, there's no other way to do this.
Sure.
He got boxed in, or this is it. This is the legal way because he's the one that made the laws. So you know what I mean? He's looking at what the culture is saying, and he's stooping to that and helping them understand through that language.
That's right.
And I think all of that is just an important way to understand. We have this idea. I think this is going to come up in our next questions too, that we often bring our own ideas about God to the Bible, and then we have done that for so long, we tend to think, well, that's just the way it has to be. In this case, for some of us, we go, well, that just doesn't, it seems like God would just create the system himself and make us all do it. He wouldn't come in and accommodate, or he wouldn't come in and use ransom language that was, maybe that was all part of the original thing, and that's why it goes in. And it's this idea that in order for God to be in control, it's almost as everything just has to drop down from the sky as is. But God is a relational God. And we say that we know this for sure. I know this is true in my life, that God meets me where I'm at. Mm-hmm. God meets me where I'm at and goes, I want to relate to you and have this. And so it doesn't take anything away from God's wisdom or his strength. In fact, in some ways, I think it adds to it that God's able to come in and be able to meet people where they're at. And so we don't know is the answer, as you're hearing us all fumble through this, is we just don't know what happened. We don't know how it happened, but we know.
Yeah, but I would say to the questioner, again, to try and boil it down to where this all comes down to, what does God want you to see when you see the cross? And he doesn't want you to look at it as some mechanism, necessarily. Right. Although if that helps us understand it, it's fine. Like we've been saying, I think what it comes down to, I think Jesus framed it very well. He said, "Greater love has no man than this, than one lay down his life for his friends."
Yep.
And then he went and did that. So he defined what love looks like in its greatest form. Then he went to the cross and said, "Here it is. Let me show you." You got a phone call in?
Jason's in a whole gospel presentation here. We got a phone call go off.
It happens every time. But anyway, so I think what God intends for us to see when we see him hanging on the cross is what love looks like. So that and we know that that's what draws us to trust and faith in him. I think in the end, that's what really matters.
Well, and even the idea, it's so easy, or it seems natural for us to talk about God loving us and God being love. That concept is exceptionally unique outside of Christianity.
That's right.
And people don't get that. A lot of people, it always is almost humorous to me when an atheist says to me, "So if God's a loving God," and I want to go, "Well, you don't believe that, do you?"
We gave you that idea.
I mean, mm-hmm. The whole idea is you want me to now prove something that you already told me you don't believe. But I mean,
right?
The idea that God is loving, love is a relational term,
right?
I mean, by its very nature, it's not. And God, being very just and legalistic, decided that the only way for us to be together was to kill something. Mm-hmm. No, it's God's loving. Mm-hmm. God is loving by nature, and he's trying to communicate that. And again, anytime you go to the Bible, I remember John Walton, who is my favorite scholar on the early part of the Bible, at Genesis. He says you must always realize that entering the world of Genesis is a cross-cultural experience.
Yes.
We don't belong in that world. The other thought that I always have is God is always cross-culturally communicating to us.
Yeah.
We aren't like him. I mean, the fact that when we say he's holy, it means he's distinct from us. He is different than us. So God is always communicating to us in a way he has to stoop for us to hear anything from him.
Yep. 100%. Well, and I think anyone who's had children understands that, because I have found my ability as a communicator get stretched when talking to a 5-year-old, because I can explain something correct and then say it to them, but I'm using language they don't understand. I'm using concepts they don't understand. And then they go, huh? What? Like that doesn't make it. And then I have to use imperfect analogies to get them to the concept I want them to understand.
Yep.
Well, it's like a peanut butter sandwich. Well, it's not at all like a peanut butter
Right.
sandwich, but peanut butter sandwich is what they know.
You were conveying truth to them. It just wasn't. It wasn't all the truth. It was just the truth they
Right.
could get. It's like if there's a pot of boiling water and I ask a scientist what's going on there, they're going to tell me, well, we're heating up the molecules there to the point of 212 degrees and all that. And I ask you what's happening there. I go, I'm making grits.
Right.
Which one of those is true? They're both true.
Right.
They just neither one are the complete truth of what's
Yeah.
happening in that moment. And God's constantly, those analogies of there's a death that brings about life, that's true. There's
Yes.
a ransom taking place, that's
Yes.
true. Jesus is conquering the powers of sin, that's true.
Mhm.
None of those are the complete truth, which is why I now am more comfortable saying something happened on the cross that made us right with God.
Yeah.
What happened exactly, how it acts, I'm not sure God has been able to give us the full truth because we might not have been able to understand it.
Yeah.
Something happened.
Well,
Yes.
and nothing takes away from the things that matter. Something happened, and my response is clear. I trust in that.
That's
I
right.
trust
and what
in
Jason
him.
said is he was conveying love for us.
Mhm.
Right.
Something happened that conveyed God's love for me so that I would trust in him.
Yes.
Mhm.
And,
And
so,
if that's where we wind up in the end, that's all that matters.
yes.
It is all that matters.
Yes.
So,
It really is all that matters.
not that this question doesn't matter.
No, not
great
to say
question,
that. Yeah.
great discussion, and it should be had. But at the end of the day,
No, I
that's where
trust
we
the
ought to-
person that
Yeah,
asked it. It was
absolutely.
trying to get to a better understanding.
and you should,
Yeah, you should.
and you should go as far as you can in your understanding.
Yeah,
just know that you're not ever going to really.
you
get
probably won't get there.
there. No, and that's okay. And guess what? We get all of eternity to get
That's
there.
what I was about to say.
So
Yeah.
that'll be
exactly
fun.
right.
We'll have a good time doing that. All right. Next question. Actually, there are two questions that I combined into one because I think they both hit on the same
Because
topic.
Jason is accommodating our schedule.
I am a and I don't know. It could have been the same person asked these
Sure.
two different questions, but they do deal with the same issue.
dovetail.
Hit
Yeah.
him up, Jason. What is it?
They deal with the same issue, which is Jesus's humanity versus Jesus's divinity. And if you don't know what that means, Jesus being human, fully human like us, but also being God at the same time, which again is one of those mysteries that we just talked about. But these two questions kind of hit at that and how that works. So we'll talk about both of them in that greater context. So here are the two questions. They say, I just read where Jesus, as a boy, was in the temple. He astounded the teachers. Then Luke, who writes that book, says he grew in knowledge. So if Jesus is God and God knows everything, how could Jesus grow in knowledge? Very good question.
That's a
right?
great question.
Now, the other question is similar, but in a different direction. If Jesus emptied himself and became fully human and then never sinned, why can't anyone else? Wouldn't he have had to still been fully God at the same time he was on earth? So I guess their question is if Jesus emptied himself and lived a life that without sin, is it not possible that someone else could do the same? But if he was God, did that give him some advantage to doing that whole thing? So let's talk about that whole issue of Jesus' humanity versus his divinity. How does that work? Do we even know?
No,
we don't know.
No, we do not know. But
But we're going to talk for about 25
we,
minutes.
we know for sure that it took place because Paul gives us a really eloquent description of it. That he emptied himself. Another way of saying it is he didn't. One of the translators said he did not count his godness to be an advantage.
Yes.
He did not take advantage of that. He
Divine
voluntarily-
privileges is another way I've heard.
yes.
He emptied himself as his divine privileges.
So, and we know for sure there are things that happen. One again, just to quote N.T. Wright, not on this because I haven't ever heard him address this, but he said often the problem we have when people say something about didn't God do is that when people say God is like something, the word they think they know what it means is God. And he said, we don't really know what that word completely means.
Yeah.
And because we don't completely know what that means, everything else we say is going to have a little bit of a question mark to it. He said, we think it means God is always omniscient. He's always omnipresent. He's always all of these things. But if God is all those things, there may be other things he is that we don't know about because he's omniscient. He can do whatever it means. He's all powerful, So we're the ones that have put those words to him to describe the characteristics of him that we see.
Well, and I think
we don't know for sure. So to say Jesus was fully God and fully man, we know what man is like. Yeah. We don't know that other definition fully.
Well, and I think it's important, going back to the last question we had here, the how is very tricky because we can't know, but we know what. We know what happened. We know that God came in flesh and blood. He came in human form. He came as a man named Jesus, which that in and of itself boggles the mind, and we talk about it as if it's just like, well, of course.
Well, of course, he was born in the manger. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was saying this to my daughters when we do a Bible story every Saturday, and we're talking about it, we're talking about Jesus, and I said, just imagine that for a moment, that God, who is infinitely big, which infinitely big just means there's no way to contain him. He's so big, you cannot contain him. There are no borders to God. Chose to get as small as an embryo.
Right.
Chose to get, I mean, that's as contained as you can get. And he chooses to get down into the size of an embryo, and then he grows out to be a baby and then a child who has to grow in knowledge and wisdom. And I think about, can you imagine Mary? Because here's what we know is he didn't at that moment. There were things he still had to grow in knowledge about, which is very likely Mary had to sit there like I do with my kids and go, stop putting your fingers in your mouth. Stop putting you gotta put, you gotta grab it like this to eat it, or hold your spoon like this. And imagine talking to God and that's when you talk about the part of the Philippians passage where Paul is talking about emptying himself as divine privileges. It's in context of humility. Right. Imagine the humility that God has to sit there with a creature he created who he saw as a baby, pooping its pants, and then having to sit there and go, well, I guess you're going to change me now. Like, you know what I mean? There's this thing, and it almost is, and my girls giggle when we talk about it, and I go, there is something comical about this. And then when we don't see that, we talk about it as if it's just this normal thing.
And we really want to dress it up because
Yes.
And here's the thing, that story about Jesus in the temple at a 12-year-old. Growing up in the church that I went to, we'd have these picture books, and here's Jesus, and he's surrounded by these teachers. And the picture I have in my mind, I have it really clearly in my mind that I saw in it. It appears that Jesus is teaching the teachers.
That's right.
But it's really clear when you read Luke, because Luke starts that passage by talking about the fact that Jesus grew in wisdom and knowledge. Uses this story as an indication of that. This is his illustration of that. Then he closes that passage by saying, Mary treasured these things up, and the young man continued to grow in favor with God and favor with man. So the whole time, he's doing everything God would find favorable and what other people would find favorable. It wasn't automatic.
Right.
He had to grow in those.
Well, and
I know what Luke is trying to convey because you can see the way it works. He sets up a statement, he gives an illustration, and then he sums it up at the end. So the fact that we think that Jesus was teaching those dudes, that is not what was happening. He was sitting listening to them, and he asked them questions, and they were amazed that a 12-year-old could think of those questions.
Well, because that's how they would engage with one another.
Yeah.
He was engaging like a student could, and they look at him and they go, "What, this guy's son, this is a carpenter's son. How in the world can he engage like all these other students would normally engage?" And there's this whole process to that. But when you talk about Luke, if I remember correctly, Luke says grow in favor with it, but he says grow in wisdom and stature. And what he's doing is he's combining, just to go to your point, just as Jesus had to grow. We don't think Jesus came out as a 33-year-old man from like baby little, everyone, that's the Ricky Bobby joke, a little whatever, 8 ounce, 8 pounds, 6 ounce baby. We understand that Jesus had to grow physically. The idea, what Luke is saying is he also had mental capacities that had to grow.
Well, and I'm convinced that I don't have, just because of putting the whole of the New Testament together, I think Luke is combating Gnosticism with this one little story. And those of you who don't understand, first, second John, third John, they're all combating. Gnosticism is this belief that it appears like occasionally people still fall into today of Jesus was God, but he wasn't really a dude.
Right.
That's right.
He was he was pretending to be. He had sort of
He was
faked
like a
it.
spirit that didn't have a
and
body.
He took on this body, and he wasn't really a man. He wasn't even really a boy. He was just sort of faking it and fooling people. And Luke's going, no, he was a guy. He was a young man. He had to grow in stature, and he grew in knowledge. So that when we later hear in Hebrews, he was tempted every way like you are, you can have confidence. He was tempted every way like you are, yet he did not sin, which gets to the second
question.
It's the second question. So my answer to the second question, though the Bible does not explicitly say this, is yes, I do think human beings could have fulfilled the nature of the law. No one got it done.
Mm-hmm. And never did, never will.
It doesn't appear like anybody's going to make that.
But, there's, I think another part of this humanity, which goes to the temptation part too, is I think it's this weird, I don't know if dichotomy is the right word for it. It's this weird thing where we have somehow overinflated humanity to some degree. Like there's this version of like humanism that exists, that humans are just inherently great and we can get to a place where we don't need religion and stuff because we'll just all inherently be morally good. Like babies will just come out and they won't be hateful and all this kind of stuff. There's that version. But I think by and large where most of us live is we have this very undignified view of humanity that we're almost just clumps of cells and brain chemistry and blood and bone. And what Jesus is doing is, and I think that's why when you have, like little kids can have these questions, and even I hear on a podcast, church podcast, feel this, but my little kids will go, do you think Jesus farted? You know what I mean? But it feels so undignified to say that about Jesus. And then I go, yeah, probably, because
it's the way our stomachs work.
Well, and that's what I said. But there's this, right, but it feels that way when you say it, because it feels like you shouldn't say that about Jesus, because what Jesus is doing by becoming human is he's upping the dignity of humanity.
He's redeeming humanity.
Yes, he comes in human form. Because I talk to my kids about that. We get these pictures of Jesus as a kid, and I said to one of my girls, and she was sitting there, and she has those things, you skin your knees, and this is one of my little girls I have one little girl who needs to cry a little less. I have another little girl who never wants to cry because she thinks I need to be tough about everything. And I said to her when she skinned her knee, I said, I bet Jesus one time when he was a little boy, I think of that Rich Mullins song where he skins his knees and he tries not to cry. Because, and we think of that as, well, that's not very dignified to think of Jesus, or that Jesus one time had a cold or a stomach bug, or that one day Jesus had to go through puberty. And that maybe one day Jesus had acne, and that one day, all these things that we look at and we just kind of see as these parts of ourselves that we don't want to talk, and we see them as weakness and we see them as bad, and that Jesus enters into that and goes, there's a way to live like God, to be like God in the midst of puberty or in the midst of a skinned knee, and you just you're so insecure about it. And I think I'm so thankful that Jesus did, people often talk about, why didn't Jesus just come and die on the cross and make the whole thing? There's a level of redeeming humanity and showing to us.
Well, you can't read the Bible. If the Bible is a unified story that leads to Jesus, which we believe it is, then you can't see that God has always wanted to work with humans, and ultimately the incarnation is the fulfillment of all of that. He came to be, he created humans for us to enter into the relationship with it. It's always been relational, and this is just the final thing. I think we miss so much of even the question of couldn't somebody do it? It feels like the implication is, well, that's not possible. No human being could ever do that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think now we're taking humanity down to we're really just animals, Well, all we can do is react to our urges, and if you get mad, you're going to do stuff you don't want to do. But you don't have to.
It's that old phrase, well, I'm only human.
Right.
And
then Jesus,
that's offensive to God, I believe.
Well, it's offensive to Jesus because one, and I can't remember, you were talking, the verbiage you used for the Bible is the Bible Project's language. And I remember they did a video about this new humanity. And I think I played it. I know I played it for students. I can't remember if I played it here, but one of the images they use is that Jesus is showing us what humanity really is.
That's right.
This is always what we're. So when you say things like, and I mean, when people say things like, to err is human, or this idea of that I'm only human and I'm going to mess up. The idea is, no, Jesus is saying, no, this is what humanity looks like: patience and kindness and all of these things. And there's a way to be this. And so to answer the question about, is it possible? And I love the illustration of the Bible Project because they're animation so you can see it better, but they talk about Jesus is the first human because he's fully God, that he's able to live in the kingdom of heaven at the same time while walking on earth. And so he's able to live in the will of God at all times. That he perceives, when you talk about natural reactions, Jesus' natural reaction to anger and temptation, where mine may be to punch you back in the face because he believes I'm living in the full kingdom of God. It's not that the temptation doesn't come into his head, but the temptation is not as natural to him as extending love or extending peace or extending kindness. He's able to live in both kingdoms, and he provides us a way to do the same thing. He says, you're invited into this kingdom.
When we said, I think on a couple podcasts ago, that part of the goal of the Christian life is to allow Jesus to train me to become that type of person.
Yeah, to do what he did.
So that I am fit for the kingdom when it finally comes in its fullness. I am the type of person that can exist in that kingdom. Not to say that I don't have a long way to go and won't still need to be perfected at the end of my life, but that is the trajectory I'm on.
Well, and you and I had this conversation just a couple days ago about you have been around older believers who it does seem like their reactions don't make sense.
That's right.
And you know it's because of this training that they've gone through their whole life of training themselves to live so fully in the with God life or the kingdom of God or in Christ, all these different languages for it, that their new natural reactions are not something that would have been when they were 20. And you and I talked about that doesn't just happen because you got older.
No, I don't. I make it a habit now because I am older, and people go, "You've gotten wise as you got older." And I said, "Well, those are coincidental. Old and wise don't go together because you and I both know a lot of old stupid people and a lot of old really not nice people."
That's right.
I mean,
Right.
And this person I was talking to works at a retirement home. I said, because I guarantee you, every day you see old men that your young nurses don't want to be around. They're an embarrassment to their family. That's naturally what happens. That's naturally what happens. But you don't have to have that happen. That doesn't have to be that way. There is a different way to do life, and I think Jesus just chose it. He says, "I only do what I see the Father does," and that came at 30, but he grew into that. So I think it is possible.
Yeah.
Sure. I think it is possible. It is definitely, I know for sure it is possible for Jesus to overcome natural tendencies because it has happened in my life.
Yes. Amen.
All right. That's it for us today. We'll be back next week with more questions, more headlines, which I know y'all are excited about.
I am excited about.
So we will get into that next week. See you guys then.